Hi guys, in today's video we'll be looking at ForEach loops and how we can use those to access the items in our arrays. So let's have a look. Let's launch Visual Studio, create a new project, new console app, .NET Framework, C#, click Next, and we will call this ForEach loops, and click Create. So let's make an array of strings. So we'll say var string array, or actually we'll call it string list equals new list of strings, and we will add some values in there to start with. So we'll have a list of names. So we'll have James, John, Steve, and Connor. So we've got our array of names essentially, and now we want to loop over them. So we'll use our ForEach loop like we have before. We'll say ForEach var item in string list, and we'll open up our braces. So we've now got a basic loop going, but there is a few things that you can't do whilst inside of a loop. So one of those is to add something to the list. So say if we wanted to loop over all of the names in the list and we wanted to add another name in the list each time, so, or add a duplicate, for example. So what we might think we could do is we could say string list dot add, and then we could put in, I don't know, we'll just put the same name in again. So we'll say item, which is the current item in the loop. So if we run that, the program will crash. You see here, collection was modified, enumeration operation may not execute. So what that basically tells us is we are not able to add or remove things from a list whilst we're looping it in this way. There's a way around this. If you did need to do this for some reason, there's probably a number of occasions where you might want to do that. You could, instead of looping through that list, you could make a copy of it. So you could say, I want to convert that list to list. And what this toList function does is it just creates a copy of this array, and we'll just loop through that copy instead of looping through the original one. And then when we add our item into the list, we're actually adding it into a different one to the one we're looping from. It's got the same values in, but it's just not the same list that we were looping through before. I'm just going to add a line of code to stop the program from crashing. So we'll say console.read line. That'll stop the program from ending, and we will output a count of this list in the console, so we know how many names were in there. Actually, let's do a second ForEach loop on the list, and we'll say ForEach var item in string list, and we won't make a copy this time. We'll just loop on the original list with the new items that we've added in whilst looping through the copy, and then we'll put those in the console. So we'll say console.writeLine item. And actually, something else to point out is this var item doesn't need to be, you can name this anything. It's just a variable. You're creating a variable to hold one of the items from the list for this specific loop. So we could actually call this name, since we know they're all names. And let's go ahead and run that. And what we should see is all of the names repeated twice because we've added them in a second time. So let's have a look at that. So you see James, John, Steve, Connor, James, John, Steve, Connor. So that's one way to add things into a list that you may need to loop for some reason. Something else you can also do in ForEach loops, which we could also do in our while loop that we looked at a while ago, is we can break them. So we could have some conditional logic in here, and we could say if item equals Steve, we could write a message to the console and say found Steve, finished looping early, and then we could break the loop like we did before. Just like before, if we double click on break, it'll highlight which loop that will be broken by this line of code. So that could be useful if you might be looping through a list to see if something is in there. And in this instance, we're looking for Steve. And when we find Steve, we'll do something with Steve. We'll maybe write something to the console or something a bit more complex somewhere else. And then we don't really need to keep looping through the list anymore, because the only reason we did it was to find Steve. We found him so we could break. So that's breaking. There is also another feature of the ForEach loop where you can continue into the next loop. So you could say, I'm finished with this particular one, just move on to the next one and ignore the rest of the code in this block. So the way we would do that is we would have maybe some conditional logic. We'll say if item equals John, and then we could just say continue, and we'll just pop a line in the console there. So we'll say console.writeLine, and we will just mention that we found John but decided to skip. And essentially what this does is we come in here, if the item is equal to John, which the second loop it will be, instead of continuing on to the rest of this code, we just say continue, and then that basically jumps us to the end of that particular iteration of the loop, and then we start again, and obviously the next one would then be Steve, and once we find Steve, we break the loop, so we never actually get to Connor. And I will add one more line here just so we can output who actually gets looped. So we say console.writeLine, and we'll say currently looping on, and we'll add the name, so the item. So if we run this one, we'll see that we started with James and we outputted that was the current loop. And then we got to John, and then it realized that it was John, and it said, actually, I'm just going to continue rather than carrying on. Then we got to Steve. It wasn't John, so it didn't skip the rest of the code. And then it was Steve, so it decided that actually it was going to break the loop early. And then we hit the end of our program. And if I hit return, the program ends. So continue is really useful if you want to skip a bunch of code under a certain condition inside your loop. Break is really good if you're looping until you find something you're looking for, and then you can just finish the loop early without having to loop through every single item in the list. And yeah, that's basically it for ForEach loops. Hi guys, well done for making it to the end of the video. Just a quick heads up that there is a link to the project files from today's session in the video description. If you have any questions about anything we've covered today, feel free to leave me a comment. And as always, I will see you in the next one.